So far, we've talked about best practices for writing for the web and how we can set up our web pages to really effectively communicate information to our audience. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about media and, working with the media and the importance of, being prepared to work with the media. Many of you at some point in your career might have to interact with a source of media in terms of representing your organization. Maybe you just published research that's getting media attention, or maybe your organization, just got some new funding to do a program. Regardless of whether you go into clinical medicine, you go into a public health focused, career at a county or in a research setting, you're most likely going to interact with the media at some point. So in the next couple of videos, we're going to talk about what exactly we mean by the media. We're going to talk about how to work with the media effectively and the importance of doing that. So what do we mean by the media? We hear this term all the time. What exactly does the word media mean? Well, media refers to the communication channels through which we disseminate news, music, movies, education, promotional messages, and other data. It includes physical and online newspapers and magazines, television, radio, billboards, telephone, the internet, fax, all kinds of different sources and channels in which we communicate all kinds of different things. Media is really a large umbrella term that encompasses all of these different aspects of information dissemination. So, where do most Americans get their information? Where do they get the news on what's going on? Well, we tend to get, our information, it comes from the media, but exactly what kind of sources are we using in terms of how we actually obtain that information? So this slide shows data that was published in 2020 on the percent of US adults who get their news from whatever that specific method is. So you see that, most Americans get their health information, get their news, I should say, from a smartphone or computer tablet, right? And this is, a lot higher in terms of the number of people who are getting that from television, from a radio, or from a print publication, right? Most of us at this point are using smartphones, our computers, or maybe an iPad in order to get news and information. These other sources like TV and radio and print, these have, kind of gone down in terms of their usage over recent years because of the development of all these new technologies. So media plays a really, really big role in public health. And I think this is something that we have especially come to recognize and appreciate during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? The media has played a huge role in terms of the information that people are getting. Not all of that information is credible information based on data, but people are getting their information from the media. And there's a quote here from an article that says, "The importance of effective communication among public health officials, the media, and the public is particularly critical during crises. During such time, the news media plays an important role in amplifying or attenuating the public's perception of risk and serves as a key link in the risk communication process," right? So, the way that the media portrays information is really, really important in terms of communicating the public health risk and oftentimes the actions that people take in response to whatever that risk is that's being communicated. Some of you might go on to public health focused careers. Some of you may not go into public health focused careers. You might go into more, clinical medicine tracks. Regardless of what track you decide to go, in which direction, you decide to go in your career, working with the media and understanding, how to work with the media is really important to all of you. As I mentioned, you may need to give a media interview in person, on the phone, over email at some point in your career. You might need to serve as a spokesperson in some sort of capacity. So, maybe you need to go, sit on an expert panel at a conference focused on, delivering care in a specific type of setting or a specific clinical condition. You might sit on an expert panel at a conference or some sort of other community-based setting where you're providing information to the public. You might be providing information via social media messaging as well. Effective media coverage will boost the visibility of your organization and it will inspire trust, right? So you want to make sure that you're delivering information via media sources in a way where you're coming off as credible, you're coming off as a trusted, person in whatever specific area or organization that you're representing. So in summary, you want to be well prepared to be the spokesperson for your organization on a given topic. So as I mentioned, you want to come off as the credible, trusted source of information, that expert person who is really effective in using media to deliver information. So we can use the CDC's message mapping to help us prepare in terms of working with the media. So the first step that you want to do is identify the stakeholders, the people who are going to be absorbing that information from that media source. So think about who will be reading or watching whatever media source that's putting that information out there, and who is most affected by the topic you are discussing. You really want to make sure you have a really strong understanding of who those stakeholders are in terms of the people who will be that target audience, the people who will be affected by whatever topic you're covering. The second piece of this is to identify their questions and concerns. What specific information do stakeholders want? You want to make sure when you're thinking about the development of your information you communicate that it really is addressing whatever those common kind of hot topic questions or concerns are on a given topic at that point in time. Number 3, you want to find the underlying themes. So, sort through their questions and concerns that you've identified in step 2 and identify kind of a few overarching concepts. What are kind of the big overarching themes that run across all of these different questions? In step 4, you want to develop key messages. So, you've identified the questions and concerns of your stakeholders. You've identified some themes. Now, based on those themes, what are the key messages that you want to communicate in that media interview to that target audience? You want to base these messages on both the specific concerns and the underlying themes. You want to make sure that these key messages are very specific, that you've practiced them and you've got them down in a way that's very clear, concise, and easy to understand by your target audience. And then you want to find supporting evidence. So, carefully pick a few key facts that you can bring up in your message, right? So if you're talking about, the importance of getting a COVID-19 vaccine, maybe one of the questions or concerns in your target audience is how is that going to affect fertility, right? And, you've gone through this process and one of your key messages is that, COVID-19 vaccines save lives and they don't affect fertility. So, picking key facts, you can talk about the evidence that shows if you're not vaccinated for COVID-19, you're X more times likely to die from a COVID-19 infection. And, a study of maybe, 10,000 participants found that there was, absolutely zero effect on fertility in those subjects. So find some supporting evidence that will help you, really support and back up the key messages that you're trying to communicate to that audience. So when you're trying to create effective key messages, there are some things that you want to think about. When you think about your key messages, You want them to be brief in terms of the number of messages and also the content of those messages. So you want to aim for no more than 3 key messages in your media interview. When you're working with the media, you want to keep those messages really brief, 9 words or fewer, 3 seconds spoken aloud. Make sure they're easy for your target audience to understand. You want to make sure that you're using terminology that they will understand, words that they will use. You don't want to be, spitting out large scientific words that your target audience is going to have no idea what you're talking about. And you want to have supporting evidence for each message. The person interviewing you might push you on something that you said in terms of one of those key messages. So you need to have supporting evidence in your back pocket that supports, that key message that you're trying to communicate. So again, less is more when it comes to creating effective key messages. You don't want a lot of messages. You want, no more than 3, and you want those messages to be short. When you try and communicate too much information, it becomes really overwhelming, and it kind of, it hurts your ability to be able to effectively communicate to a target audience. So these are some of the things we want to think about when it comes to creating effective key messages for your target audience. So besides doing all of these things when you're preparing for working with the media, some things that you should also do is ask the reporter, the blogger, or the panel coordinator, whoever it is that is going to be interviewing you, to provide the interview questions ahead of time. This is very standard to get these questions ahead of time. You're not asking for something unreasonable. It is very reasonable and it's very standard to ask for and get those questions ahead of time so you can prepare your responses to those questions. The last thing you want is to be surprised with questions from the person interviewing you. So make sure you ask for those questions ahead of time. If you can't get specific questions ahead of time, ask for information about the general direction of the interview, so you have an idea of how you can prepare for that interview. Practice, practice, practice. Once you get those questions, you want to, set up an outline of your responses and plan out how you're going to respond to each question. Practice what you plan to say several times. You want to come off as, not necessarily overly rehearsed, but you want to come off as someone who's credible, who knows what they're talking about. And so practice is really key to doing this effectively. Ask a peer, a friend, or a colleague to play the role of the reporter to help you practice. This can be really helpful. Have them ask the questions and practice like you're in the real thing to help, kind of calm your nerves, and also to make sure that you've got, your responses really solidified and well thought out. Lastly, you should create a handout for the reporter that includes your key messages. Make sure the reporter has a copy to take with them after the interview. Having this in writing can be really helpful in making sure that the reporter didn't miss any of maybe the really key pieces of information you wanted to communicate. It can also help prevent any, misunderstandings or misquoting of information that might happen as a result of giving that media interview. So these are also some really important steps that you should take in preparing for working with the media.